This is our time on freedom. My name is Mikhail Baranov. Russia launched 112 drones at Ukraine last night. According to the Ukrainian Air Force, more than 70 of them were Shaheds. The Russian army attacked with drones from 4 directions. The defenders of Ukraine's skies neutralized 87 drones in the north, south, and east of the country. 12 hits were also recorded. 5 people were injured as a result of the drone attack on the Odessa region. As a result, 4 residential buildings, an administrative building, and a gas station were damaged. A fire broke out at one of the port infrastructure facilities. Containers with vegetable oil, vehicles, and wood pellets caught fire.
There was a very high
fire load. It was difficult for rescuers to reach some of the burning areas. More than 80 rescuers and 4 volunteers took part in eliminating the consequences of the enemy attack. The house.
Burned down, our documents burned, my driver's license, the car registration. A Shahed drone hit the 2nd floor and the house went up like a match, because the 2nd floor was a wooden attic, and it instantly flared up like a spark, burning until 6 in the morning.
In Pryluki, Chernihiv region, a large-scale fire at an oil depot was extinguished. The day before, it was attacked by Russian drones, according to local authorities. Rescuers from different regions of Ukraine worked for almost a full day. Fire trains and robotic equipment were brought in to fight the blaze. There is no information about any casualties as a result of the strike by the Russian Federation. Today, closer to noon, Russian forces dropped 3 guided aerial bombs on Sloviansk in the Donetsk region. One of the city's residential neighborhoods and a boiler house were badly damaged. The blast wave damaged apartment buildings, and the number of injured has risen to 7. A Freedom film crew visited the site of the strike.
Residents of Sloviansk heard several powerful explosions at 11 a.m. The Russian army's attack hit a residential neighborhood of the city. As a result, in one of the damaged buildings, the ceiling collapsed onto the apartment owner.
It came down right on my head. I was sitting in the kitchen when the roof just flew off. I didn't even realize it. Everything was being blown out to the walls. All the windows were shattered. I didn't even see it happen. I ran out, started trying to get out, because from the kitchen to the hallway all the doors were blown out. I barely managed to escape.
Zinaida Petrovna's neighbors, the family living next door, suffered shrapnel wounds.
All 3 of them, the husband, wife, and mother-in-law, were taken to the hospital. They were badly injured as well. He wasn't cut here in the room, but Marina was all cut up. They sent everyone away.
According
to preliminary information, the shelling was carried out with a guided FAB-250 aerial bomb. Police officers, paramedics, the patrol police, and the state emergency service were working at the scene. There was a fire, and we can see a lot of damage to both private houses and apartment buildings.
A strike also hit one of the city's boiler houses. While local authorities are still assessing the full extent of the damage, building materials have already been delivered to people for temporary repairs after the shelling. Elena Gramova and Yevgeny Karmazin reporting from Donetsk region for Freedom TV channel.
Ukraine's defense forces struck a Lukoil gas processing plant in Russia. The information was confirmed by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Drones attacked the Karabkovsky plant in the Volgograd region. There is a major fire at the site of the strike, with flames visible from afar, according to eyewitnesses and local social media channels. The facility is considered the largest gas processor in the southern federal district of the Russian Federation, with a production capacity of 450 million cubic meters of raw material per year. The defense forces also struck another important fuel infrastructure facility, the Yefimovka linear production dispatch station in the Volgograd region.
The station, which services several main pipelines for transporting oil and petroleum products in the region, has a throughput capacity of 50 million tons per year. Explosions and fires were reported at both facilities. Information about the consequences of the strike is being clarified, according to a statement from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Telegram.
1,020 Russian servicemen were eliminated by Ukrainian defense forces over the past day. Thus, the total losses of the Russian army have exceeded 1,119,000 people, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. According to Ukrainian military sources, over the past day, a Russian tank and an armored combat vehicle were destroyed, along with 15 artillery systems and 55 vehicles. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine recorded 217 combat engagements on the front line in the past 24 hours. The Pokrovsk sector remains the most intense area. The defense forces stopped 58 attacks by Russian occupiers there. The enemy is also actively storming the Oleksandrivka direction, where about 40 battles took place. Russian forces attempted to advance 34 more times on the southern Slobozhansk bridgehead and 17 times on the Kostyantynivka sector. There was only a relative lull on the Huliepol and Kramatorsk directions. The Kremlin will raise taxes for individuals and businesses in order to continue funding the war in Ukraine. This was reported by the Center for Countering Disinformation. Moscow is focused solely on military spending at the expense of social programs, so the tax increase will affect everyone. And although the Kremlin leadership insists that military objectives will be achieved any day now, the Russian army has not made significant gains on the battlefield and is rapidly losing personnel. More details in the report from my colleagues.
The Russian army is advancing in the Zaporizhzhia direction and continues to carry out massive strikes, allegedly targeting Ukrainian military facilities. This was stated by the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Federation, Gerasimov, during his report to Putin on October 7. In response, the head of the Kremlin said that the decisions made in February 2022 to launch Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine were correct and timely, and that the goals of the so-called special military operation would be achieved. But experts note that these statements have nothing to do with reality.
For the aggressor, probably one of the key problems is that there haven't been any significant changes at the front. The fact is, the so-called special military operation is at a standstill, and the economic situation in Russia has become much more complicated, to put it mildly. I mean, including the oil refining system, the growing dependence on Chinese resources, and so on.
Stagnation, or even recession. Even according to the most optimistic forecasts by economists, Russia's economic growth rate in 2025 will not exceed 1%. In just 8 months, Russia's budget deficit has already reached almost 2% of the annual GDP, and by the end of the year it will grow to 2.6%. So, where does Putin plan to get the money to continue the war? From the pockets of the citizens. Russia is launching a new wave of tax increases. In 2026, the authorities plan to collect almost 2.5 trillion rubles more from the population and businesses. The main source of revenue will be raising the VAT rate from 20 to 22%, which will lead to higher prices.
This shows that Russia is running out of resources to finance its war of aggression against Ukraine, so the regime is trying to shift this burden onto citizens and businesses. Next year, the army and security forces will consume about 40% of the budget, since the war remains a priority for the Kremlin and these expenses remain at a high level. At the same time, social programs are being cut, and the tax burden on the population is increasing. The Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on Telegram.
Putin's goal is to wage war against Ukraine at any cost, no matter if it means completely robbing his own people or sending, most likely, thousands of Russians to their deaths at the front.
We state that Russian troops have been ordered to storm our positions at any cost. Accordingly, Russian losses have increased significantly. Just our SBU fighters alone, and only in the Pokrovsk direction, are now eliminating more than 100 Russian occupiers per day. And that's not even counting the results of the actions of fighters from other components of our defense and security forces. In total, over the past month, the fighters of the SBU Special Operations Center have eliminated 3,028 Russian occupiers, with each case properly verified. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Russian propaganda will now pay special attention to shaping the proper military-political mindset among its personnel. Russian soldiers, both conscripts and contract servicemen, will be told about the so-called heroic deeds of participants in the war against Ukraine. In addition, Russian military personnel will be forced to study Putin's annual address to the Federal Assembly, according to the publication Verska.
According to the plan, 10 hours are allocated for lectures about heroic deeds, and they will be given every month throughout the year. In addition, soldiers will have to attend the traditional lecture on extremism, terrorism, and neo-Nazism as threats to security, to which, according to Verska, Russophobia will also be added next year.
Putin's desire to militarize Russia as much as possible could end in disaster for him. The Kremlin fears that the return from the front of tens of thousands of soldiers and former prisoners will trigger a surge in crime and social destabilization. The situation is already being compared to the 1990s, when former participants of the Afghan war formed gangs and mafia groups, according to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service. Since 2023, military courts have received nearly 1,000 cases under articles related to murder and intentional infliction of grievous bodily harm resulting in death. And the number of convictions for such crimes has risen sharply. If there were 38 in 2022, then in the current period of 2025, Russian courts have reviewed 377 new cases. Yulia Granitskaya for Frida TV channel.
The supply of American long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine could force the Russians to sit down at the negotiating table. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated this during a meeting with journalists. According to him, the issue of transferring high-precision weapons to Kyiv is currently being decided in Washington. The discussions are taking place at a technical level. In addition, the president announced that a Ukrainian delegation will visit the United States next week and emphasized that they will discuss strengthening air defense, energy, sanctions, peace negotiations, and frozen Russian assets. Zelenskyy also noted that despite the cold autumn, relations between Ukraine and the United States remain warm.
I think President Trump wants us to be at the negotiating table, and we support this approach. I think he really wants a ceasefire, a ceasefire, and a ceasefire, and a ceasefire, a ceasefire. I believe that has been his goal from the very beginning, and we are grateful for that. I think that our meeting, along with the real facts, gives him a broader understanding that the Russians are not selling him what they can actually deliver. It is very important that today, at different levels, a dialogue is taking place after our meeting. And everyone, by the way, says that despite the temperature outside, we have warm relations at various levels. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine.
Strikes could have significant consequences for Moscow and St. Petersburg, which, according to Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, may force the Russian elites to look for a replacement for the Kremlin dictator Putin and lead to an end to the war against Ukraine.
As soon as Moscow and St. Petersburg start to feel the full impact of the war, and not just once, but consistently, it will mean either the elites will look for a replacement for Putin and pull out of the war, at least temporarily, or Putin himself will do everything he can to end the war. There may be talk about nuclear weapons, but Russia is just a raw materials appendage of China now. Moscow is no longer a real player and doesn't make decisions on such matters anymore. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
US President Donald Trump believes that he will ultimately be able to resolve Russia's war against Ukraine. He stated this during a roundtable at the White House. However, the American leader admitted that Putin let him down by continuing to intensify and escalate the shelling of Ukraine. Trump also stated that the United States was able to resolve 7 wars and is now on the path to ending an 8th. At the same time, the head of the White House noted that the dialogue with Putin turned out to be more difficult than the peace negotiations regarding, for example, Gaza, where an agreement is almost reached.
I
think that in the end, we will resolve the situation with Russia, which is terrible. By the way, just last week, 7,000 people died in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. I think we will resolve this.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.